The earring was tiny, a small diamond stud that caught the light as it lay on our bathroom floor. It wasn't mine. I stood frozen, staring at this minuscule intruder that had just shattered my reality. One small piece of jewelry that didn't belong in my home, in my bathroom, near the shower my husband had used this morning before leaving for what he'd called a 3-day business conference in Chicago. My name is Eliza Bennett, and after 12 years of marriage, I'd never once suspected my husband of infidelity. Not once questioned his late nights at the office or weekend business trips. Not until that earring winked at me from my bathroom tile, silent but damning. I picked it up, the metal cold against my fingertips. Expensive. Delicate. Not the kind of jewelry I wore with my practical teaching wardrobe. This belonged to someone who didn't have to worry about 32nd graders and their art projects. I should have confronted him immediately. Called him on his cell, demanded answers. That's what the heroines in movies would do, display righteous anger, throw his clothes onto the front lawn, change the locks. Instead, I carefully placed the earring in a small jewelry box and set it on my bedside table. Then I sat on the edge of our bed, in the home we'd built together, and tried to breathe through the tightness in my chest. James had never given me reason to doubt him before. Surely there was an explanation. A colleague had used our shower for some reason? He'd found it somewhere and picked it up, forgetting it was in his pocket. Even as these thoughts formed, I knew how desperate they sounded. My phone buzzed with a text. James. Just landed in Chicago. Hotel's nice. Miss you already. Love you. Each word felt like a knife twist. My thumbs hovered over the screen as I debated my response. Confrontation by text seemed cowardly, inadequate for the magnitude of what I'd discovered. And what if I was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation? Glad you arrived safely, I finally replied. Love you too. The lie burned in my throat. After 12 years together, I thought I knew my husband. James Bennett, brilliant software engineer, caring husband, the man who still brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning. The man who remembered every anniversary with thoughtful gifts, who coached Little League despite not having children of his own, who called his mother every week without fail. Could I have been so blind? I placed the jewelry box in my purse, grabbed my car keys, and headed to the one person who had never lied to me. My sister Marion lived 40 minutes away in a downtown loft with her German shepherd, Bruno. She opened the door at my first knock, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside. What happened? She demanded, leading me to her couch. I couldn't speak. Just opened my hand to reveal the small diamond stud. I don't understand, Marion said, frowning at the earring. Is that yours? I shook my head. I found it on our bathroom floor this morning. After James left for his business trip in Chicago. Understanding dawned on her face, followed quickly by anger. That son of a bitch. I don't know for sure, I said quickly. Maybe there's an explanation. Marion's eyebrows shot up. Like what, Eliza? That it materialized out of thin air? That it's been there for months and your magical cleaning skills somehow missed it until today? Put that way, my desperate reasoning did sound absurd. I don't know what to do, I admitted, the tears I'd been holding back finally spilling over. I never thought, not James. Marion sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. I know, sweetie. I'm so sorry. After a moment, she asked, what does your gut tell you? I closed my eyes, forced myself to listen to the voice I'd been trying to silence since finding the earring. It whispered all the signs I'd been ignoring, the increased business trips over the past few months, the new cologne, the late-night texts he'd explain away as work emergencies. That he's having an affair, I finally said, the words like ash in my mouth. Marion squeezed my shoulder. Then we need to find out for sure. Is he really in Chicago? I blinked. He texted that he'd landed. That doesn't mean anything. He could be anywhere. She reached for her laptop. What's his flight information? I don't know. He usually handles all the travel arrangements. Marion's eyes narrowed. And you've never checked? Never asked for details? I felt defensive suddenly. Why would I? I trusted him. She sighed. Of course you did. I'm sorry. She opened her laptop. What's his office number? Let's start there. Marion, I can't just call his office and. Yes, you can. He told you he's at a business conference, right? So his colleagues should know about it. The idea of calling James's office, of possibly exposing my suspicions to his coworkers, made me physically ill. But Marion was right. I needed to know. I dialed the main office number with shaking hands. Nexus Software, how may I direct your call? The receptionist's voice was professionally cheerful. Hi, this is Eliza Bennett, James Bennett's wife, I said, trying to sound normal. I'm trying to reach my husband, but his cell is going straight to voicemail. I know he's at the conference in Chicago, but I'm not sure which hotel. Chicago conference? The receptionist sounded confused. Let me check the calendar. I heard typing, then, I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett, but there's no conference in Chicago this week. Mr. Bennett requested personal days. He's out of the office until Thursday. The room tilted beneath me. I must have misunderstood. Thank you. I hung up, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Eliza? Marion's voice seemed to come from very far away. What did they say? There's no conference, I whispered. He took personal days. Marion's face hardened. That lying bastard. The truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. James was lying. The earring wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. My husband was cheating on me. I need to know who she is, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Marion nodded. Okay. Let's think. The earring is our first clue. High-end, definitely. So probably not some random woman. Someone he knows. Someone from work, maybe? I thought about the company parties I'd attended with James over the years. The women in his department were mostly married, many with children. None seemed like candidates for an affair with my husband. Except. There's a new project manager, I said slowly. Cassandra something. James mentioned her a few times recently. Said she was brilliant, that they were working closely on some big client project. Marion was already typing on her laptop. Last name? I don't know. Fisher? Foster? Something with an F. A few minutes of searching brought up a LinkedIn profile. Cassandra Frost, project manager at Nexus Software. Her profile picture showed a stunning woman with sleek dark hair and confident eyes. Is this her? Marion asked, turning the screen toward me. I nodded, a pit forming in my stomach. Cassandra looked exactly like the type of woman who would wear delicate diamond studs. Who would attract my husband's attention? Who would make him risk 12 years of marriage? So what now? I asked, feeling suddenly exhausted. Do I confront him when he gets back? pack my bags? Hire a divorce attorney? Marian closed her laptop. Now, we find out exactly what's going on. Where he really is, who he's with, and how long this has been happening. And how do we do that? A determined gleam appeared in my sister's eyes. We follow the money. Check your joint accounts, credit card statements. See if there are charges for hotels, restaurants, gifts. I hesitated. James and I maintained separate credit cards, though we shared a checking account. I'd never felt the need to scrutinize his spending. Another sign of the trust I'd so naively given him. I can access his credit card statement online, I said. He gave me the password years ago for emergencies. Was this an emergency? It felt like one. Like my entire life was crumbling around me. Back at home, I sat at our shared desktop computer, the cursor hovering over the login button for James's credit card account. This felt like an invasion of privacy, crossing a line we'd never crossed before. But then, hadn't he already shattered those boundaries by bringing another woman into our home? I logged in. The most recent statement showed normal charges, gas, a lunch near his office, the monthly subscription for his favorite tech magazine. But as I scrolled back through previous months, a pattern emerged. Charges at upscale restaurants I'd never visited. A hotel downtown, not for one night, but recurring charges every 2 weeks. A jewelry store with a substantial charge 3 weeks ago. Diamond studs, perhaps? And then I saw it. Another airline confirmation, not for Chicago, but for a round trip to Bermuda, scheduled to depart today. 2 tickets. The room spun around me. James wasn't in Chicago at a business conference. He was flying to Bermuda with another woman. With Cassandra. I printed the evidence with numb fingers, the pages hot from the printer feeling like they might burn straight through my skin. Then I called Marian. He's taking her to Bermuda, I said, my voice hollow. Right now. Today. Marian was silent for a long moment. Then, I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there. I sat in our living room, surrounded by photos of our life together. Our wedding day at the Botanical Gardens, James looking at me like I was a miracle. Hiking in Colorado on our 5th anniversary. Last Christmas at my parents' house, his arm around me as we smiled for the camera. Had he been unhappy? Had I missed signs that our marriage was failing? Or was this purely about desire, the thrill of someone new, someone who wasn't a second-grade teacher with grading to do on weekends and paint perpetually under her fingernails? By the time Marian arrived, I had moved past shock into a cold, clear anger. I want to see them together, I announced as she walked through the door. I need to see it with my own eyes. Marian's eyebrows shot up. You want to go to Bermuda? No. That's not necessary. I held up the airline confirmation. They're not leaving until tonight. 7 o'clock from O'Hare. I checked my watch. If we leave now, we can make it. Catch them before they board. Eliza. Marian's voice was gentle. What good will that do? Seeing them together will only hurt you more. I need to know it's real, I insisted. And I want to see his face when he realizes he's caught. I deserve that much. Marian studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. But we do this carefully. I don't want this turning into a scene that ends up on someone's social media. The 3-hour drive to Chicago was silent, my mind cycling through 12 years of memories, now all called into question. Had there been others before Cassandra? How long had I been living a lie? We arrived at O'Hare with an hour to spare. I knew what gate they'd be departing from, thanks to the confirmation email James had carelessly left accessible in his account. Marion and I positioned ourselves where we could watch the security line without being immediately visible. And then I saw them. James, my husband, pulling a carry-on suitcase with one hand, his other resting casually on the lower back of a tall, elegant woman with dark hair. Cassandra wore a cream-colored blazer over slim black pants, looking every bit the successful professional. More importantly, she wore diamond studs in her ears, one in each ear. Seeing them together, the easy intimacy in how they moved, the way James bent to whisper something that made her laugh, it was like being stabbed. I couldn't breathe. "That's them," I whispered to Marion, though she'd clearly already figured it out from my reaction. "What do you want to do?" she asked, her hand warm on my arm. What did I want? Part of me wanted to scream, to create exactly the kind of scene Marion had cautioned against. To let everyone in this crowded airport know that James Bennett was a liar and a cheat. But another part of me, a stronger part, wanted to maintain my dignity. Follow them, I decided. I want to confront him somewhere quiet. Not here. We kept our distance as James and Cassandra made their way through security and toward their gate. They stopped at a wine bar near their departure point, taking seats at a small table. Through the glass front of the bar, I could see them clearly, his hand covering hers on the table, her leaning in to say something in his ear. It was casual, comfortable. The body language of a couple who had been together for more than a few stolen moments. "Now," I said to Marion. "Wait here. I need to do this alone." Marion looked ready to protest, but something in my expression must have convinced her. "I'll be right here if you need me." I walked into the wine bar, my heart hammering so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. James had his back to me, but Cassandra was facing my direction. She saw me first, her eyes widening slightly before her features smoothed into practiced neutrality. "James," she said quietly, nodding in my direction. My husband turned, confusion on his face until he saw me. The color drained from his complexion in an instant. "Eliza?" His voice was strangled. "What are you? How did you?" "Hello, James," I said, surprised at how steady I sounded. "Quite a long way from Chicago, aren't you?" Cassandra looked between us, her perfect eyebrows drawing together. "Chicago?" "That's where he told me he was going," I informed her. "A business conference. I'm guessing he told you I knew about Bermuda? That I was fine with it?" Her gaze hardened as she turned to James. "You said your wife understood the situation. That you had an arrangement." "An arrangement?" My blood boiled at the implication that I had somehow consented to this betrayal. "The only arrangement we have," I said coldly, "is the one where he promised to be faithful when we exchanged vows 12 years ago." James stood abruptly. "Eliza, please. Let me explain." "Not here." "I think right here is perfect," I replied. "Intimate enough for privacy, public enough that you can't make a scene. Unless you want everyone to know exactly what kind of man you are." His eyes darted around nervously. "Can we at least sit down?" I remained standing. "I found her earring, James. On our bathroom floor." His face crumpled with realization. Beside him, Cassandra reached up to touch her ear, where indeed one diamond stud was missing. "That was careless of us," she said, her tone almost apologetic. "I told him we should meet at hotels, but he insisted your home was safer." "You travel to visit your parents most weekends," he said. Each new revelation was like another blow. James had been bringing her to our home while I visited my elderly parents 2 hours away. The same visits he'd encouraged, insisting I needed that family time while he caught up on work. I never travel on business, I told her, a twisted satisfaction blooming as her perfectly composed expression faltered. Those weekends he was working? He was with me at my parents' house until a few months ago, when suddenly he had too many deadlines to join us. Cassandra turned to James, who had the decency to look ashamed. You told me your marriage was essentially over. That you were only staying together until the house sold. I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. We're not selling our house. We just refinanced 6 months ago to renovate the kitchen. The kitchen where he makes me breakfast every Sunday morning. The betrayal in her eyes would have been satisfying if I weren't so devastated by my own. I think I've heard enough, Cassandra said, gathering her purse and standing. Enjoy your solo trip to Bermuda, James. I'm sure the resort has a great cancellation policy. She walked out without another glance at either of us, leaving me alone with the man who had shattered my trust so completely. James looked destroyed, his handsome face ashen. Eliza, I am so sorry. For which part? I asked. For cheating? For lying? For bringing her into our home? Or just for getting caught? He flinched. For all of it. I never meant for this to happen. It just did. Things don't just happen, James. You made choices. Hundreds of them. Every time you texted her, every time you met her, every time you lied to me about where you were going. I know. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I got caught up in something I couldn't control. The excitement, the newness of it. But I never stopped loving you, Eliza. Never. The worst part was, I believed him. Not that it mattered. I'm staying with Marion for a few days, I said. When I come home, I expect you to be gone. We'll figure out the details through lawyers. James's eyes widened with panic. Lawyers? Eliza, please. We can work through this. Go to counseling. I'll do anything. For a brief, weak moment, I considered it. Considered trying to salvage the ruins of our marriage. But then I pictured him with her in our home, in our bed, and knew there was no going back. Goodbye, James. I walked out of the wine bar with my head high, past the curious onlookers who had undoubtedly overheard enough to piece together the drama. Marion was waiting exactly where I'd left her, her eyes anxious until she saw my face. It's done, I said simply. She nodded, her arm around my shoulders as we walked toward the exit. I'm proud of you, Eliza. Not many could have handled that with such dignity. Dignity was cold comfort as we drove back, the miles stretching between me and the life I'd thought I had. I wondered if James would still go to Bermuda alone, or if he'd return to our empty house to lick his wounds. I found I didn't care either way. When we reached Marion's loft, my sister made up the guest bed with fresh sheets, handed me a glass of wine, and sat with me as the full weight of the day finally crashed down upon me. I keep thinking I should have known, I said, staring into my wine. That there must have been signs I missed. Marion shook her head. Don't do that to yourself. James went to great lengths to hide this. He's the one who broke your trust, not the other way around. But 12 years, Marion. 12 years, and I never once suspected he was capable of this. Because you're a good person who doesn't lie easily. You assumed he was the same. She squeezed my hand. This doesn't make you naive. It makes him a world-class liar. I slept fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of James and Cassandra laughing at my blindness. When morning came, I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls and 12 text messages, all from James. Please call me. We need to talk. I'm so sorry. I know that's not enough, but it's true. I'm not going to Bermuda. I'm coming home. Please be there. Where are you? I'm worried. I called Marion, but she won't tell me where you are. Please, Eliza. 12 years. Don't throw it away without talking to me. I deleted them all and turned off my phone. 3 days later, I returned home. James had respected my wishes and moved out, leaving a note on the kitchen counter with his temporary address and a plea to call him when I was ready to talk. I tore it up and threw it away. The next few weeks passed in a blur of practical arrangements. I met with a divorce attorney, who assured me that James's infidelity would ensure a favorable settlement. I opened a separate bank account and transferred my portion of our savings. I told my principal I might need time off for court dates, explaining the situation in the vaguest terms possible. Through it all, James continued his campaign to win me back. Flowers delivered to the house. Heartfelt emails detailing his regret and shame. Finally, a letter hand-delivered by his best friend, Michael, who had looked as uncomfortable as I felt at being made an unwilling participant in our marital drama. He's a wreck, Eliza, Michael said as he handed me the sealed envelope. I'm not defending what he did, it was unforgivable. But he loves you. He knows he screwed up the best thing in his life. I accepted the letter but made no promises to read it. After Michael left, I placed it in a drawer, unable to throw it away but unwilling to read whatever justifications or promises it contained. 6 weeks after discovering the earring, I ran into Cassandra at a coffee shop downtown. I nearly turned and walked out, but something made me stay. A need for closure, perhaps. Or simple curiosity about the woman who had helped destroy my marriage. She saw me almost immediately, her expression shifting from surprise to resignation. After a moment's hesitation, she approached my table. "May I join you?" she asked, her voice lacking the confidence I remembered from the airport. I gestured to the empty chair across from me, curious despite myself. Cassandra sat, placing her coffee carefully on the table between us. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "Though I know it's inadequate." "You thought we had an arrangement," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my tone. She winced. "I should have known better. The signs were all there, if I'd been willing to see them. The way he'd only meet on certain days. How he never gave me his home phone number. The fact that he never invited me to company events where you might be present." "How long?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me for weeks. "For months," she admitted. "Though he'd been flirting for longer. I resisted at first, I don't make a habit of getting involved with married men. But he was persistent, and I was lonely, I suppose. Vulnerable after a bad breakup. 4 months. Not as long as I'd feared, but long enough to destroy everything. He told me your marriage was over in all but name," she continued. "That you were more like roommates than spouses. That you'd both privately acknowledged it was time to move on, but were delaying the inevitable for financial reasons." I laughed, the sound hollow. "We'd just booked a trip to Italy for our anniversary next month. Hardly the actions of a couple on the brink of divorce." Cassandra closed her eyes briefly. "I am so sorry, Eliza. If it's any consolation, I haven't spoken to him since that day at the airport. I blocked his number, told HR I couldn't work with him directly anymore." "It's not really a consolation," I replied honestly. "But I appreciate the gesture." We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Cassandra finally said. "That day at the airport, you seemed so controlled. If I'd been in your position, I would have created a scene, screamed, thrown drinks. How did you stay so calm?" I considered the question. I think I was in shock. And I didn't want to give either of you the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. My dignity was all I had left. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. For what it's worth, I think he genuinely regrets what he did. Not just getting caught, but the affair itself. He talked about you all the time, you know. Even when we were together. Your kindness, your patience. How you were the best person he knew. Apparently not good enough to be faithful to, I said sharply. Cassandra flinched. I deserve that. She stood, gathering her things. I won't take any more of your time. I just wanted you to know how sorry I am for my role in all this. I watched her walk away, her shoulders straight despite the weight of the conversation. In another life, under different circumstances, we might have been friends. The thought was oddly painful. That night, I finally opened the letter from James. His handwriting was familiar, comforting even after everything, and I felt a pang of grief for the man I thought I knew. Eliza. I know you have no reason to believe anything I say right now. I've destroyed your trust completely, and there's nothing I can do to restore it overnight. Maybe not ever. But I need you to know the truth, even if it changes nothing between us. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day in 12 years. The affair with Cassandra wasn't about love or even about desire, though I know that's hard to believe. It was about my own insecurities, my fear that I was getting older and less relevant, my desperate need to feel valued and admired. None of that excuses what I did. Nothing could. But I want you to know that it was never a reflection on you or our marriage. You were always enough, more than enough. I was the one who wasn't worthy of what we had. I'm in therapy now, trying to understand why I was willing to risk everything for something so meaningless. Trying to become someone who deserves a second chance, even though I know I probably won't get one. If you're willing to talk, just once, I'd like to apologize to you properly. Face to face. Not to beg for reconciliation, but because you deserve to hear it directly from me. I love you. I always will. James. I set the letter down, tears blurring my vision. Part of me wanted to call him immediately, to hear his voice, to let him explain in person. Another part, the part that remembered the casual intimacy between him and Cassandra at the airport, recoiled at the thought. Marian had been my rock through all of this, offering her guest room indefinitely, bringing ice cream on the hardest nights, never once saying "I told you so," even though she'd always been more suspicious of James than I was. When I called her now, she answered on the first ring. "He wants to meet," I said without preamble. "To talk." "Should I?" "Do you want to?" she asked, characteristically direct. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me needs to hear what he has to say. But another part is afraid that I might forgive him. Would that be so terrible? I was silent, considering. Wouldn't it make me weak? To forgive something like this? Eliza. Marian's voice was gentle. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's a choice you make for yourself, not for him. Whether that means reconciliation or just letting go of the anger so you can move on, either way, it's about what brings you peace. Peace felt like a distant concept, something that belonged to the woman I was before finding that diamond stud on my bathroom floor. But perhaps Marian was right. Perhaps hearing James out was a step toward reclaiming some sense of control, of agency in a situation where I'd felt so powerless. "I'll think about it," I promised. 2 days later, I texted James. "We can meet. Coffee only. 1 hour." His response was immediate. "Thank you. Name the time and place." "I'll be there." We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a cafe neither of us had frequented during our marriage. I arrived early, securing a table in the corner where we wouldn't be overheard. When James walked in, I was struck by how different he looked, thinner, with shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He scanned the room anxiously until he saw me, relief washing over his face. "Eliza." He said my name like a prayer. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I gestured to the chair across from me. "You said you wanted to talk. So talk." James sat, his hands fidgeting with his coffee cup. "I don't even know where to begin. 'I'm sorry' seems so inadequate. How about the truth?" I suggested. "No more lies, James. I deserve at least that much." He nodded, swallowing hard. "The truth is, I was weak. Selfish. Cassandra started at the company, and she seemed to see me in a way I hadn't been seen in a long time. As someone exciting, someone with potential. Not just a middle-aged engineer with a mortgage and a retirement plan." "And I didn't see you that way?" I asked, the hurt evident in my voice despite my efforts to remain detached. "No, that's not it at all." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I knew well. "You saw the real me, all of me, good and bad. You loved me anyway. But somewhere along the way, I started believing I needed more. Different. The classic midlife crisis, I guess, though that's no excuse." I listened as he talked about his insecurities, his fear of aging, his desperate attempt to recapture the excitement of youth. It all sounded so cliché, so predictable. And yet, I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes, hear the self-loathing in his voice. "I've lost everything that matters," he said finally. "My integrity. Your trust. Our life together. And for what? A fantasy that wasn't even real. What do you want from me, James?" I asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. "Why did you want this meeting?" He met my gaze directly. "I want a chance to earn back your trust. Not today, not this month. Maybe not even this year. But someday. I'm in therapy, trying to understand why I did what I did, trying to become someone worthy of a second chance." The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. "I don't know if that's possible," I said honestly. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you with her. I imagine you bringing her into our home, into our bed." He flinched. "I know. And I have no right to ask you to try to move past that. But I also know that 12 years of love doesn't just disappear overnight. At least, it hasn't for me." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything between us, the love, the betrayal, the uncertain future, settling around us like a heavy blanket. "I can't promise anything," I said finally. "But I'm willing to try counseling. To see if there's anything left to salvage." The hope that bloomed on his face was almost painful to witness. "That's more than I deserve," he said quietly. "Thank you." As we left the cafe, walking to our separate cars, I felt a curious lightness. Not happiness, not forgiveness, those were still far in the future, if they came at all. But for the first time since finding that diamond earring, I felt like I could breathe again. Like I was making choices based on what I wanted, not just reacting to what had been done to me. I didn't know if James and I would find our way back to each other. Trust, once broken, is like a shattered mirror. It can be repaired, but the cracks always show. Yet there was something to be said for 12 years of shared history, for the life we'd built together. Something worth at least exploring whether it could be saved. The earring that had started it all still sat in the jewelry box on my bedside table. A tiny, gleaming reminder of how quickly certainty can dissolve, how easily trust can be broken. I thought about returning it to Cassandra, a symbolic gesture of closure, but decided against it. Some things were better left behind. Instead, I placed it in an envelope and tucked it away in a drawer, not forgotten, but no longer central to my daily thoughts. A relic of the worst chapter of my life, but not, I hoped, the final one. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be days when the pain felt as fresh as it had that first morning, when forgiveness seemed impossible. There would be tough conversations, painful revelations, moments of doubt. But there would also be the possibility of healing, of growth, of finding my way back to myself, with or without James by my side. And that, I realized, was enough to move forward. Not with blind trust this time, but with open eyes and a heart willing to believe that even the deepest wounds can heal, given time and truth and the courage to face whatever lay beneath the surface of the life I thought I knew.